Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. Thanks for coming back to this session, and thanks to the organizers. I'm really happy to be here to tell you about our work on how we can bring domain experts' knowledge to machine learning interactively. So first, I will introduce you to our case. Which task do we solve? What data we use? What are the challenges? And what is our main approach that we plan to use here. Then I will talk about the models and methods we have, and then describe the experiments that we did with human experts' knowledge and the results that we got. So our motivation lies in personalized medicine, as in many talks before, and specifically here we would like to help doctors choosing which treatment to give to the patients. So we have data set about ex vivo drug responses of cancer patients with multiple myeloma cancer, and we would like to predict what would be a drug response to a new patient based on their genomic profile, in this case mutations and cytogenetic markers. So here in this type of data, in many omics data, there lies a challenge which Anna Goldenberg already brought up earlier today in her great talk, and many of us have talked before, that we have way few samples and too many predictors so that we could learn efficiently from the data. And this kind of small and large p data, sometimes also called fat data, is very, well, our case is definitely that one, because we only have 51 samples, the patients that we have, and for each we have over 3,000 mutations and then some cytogenetic markers. And based on those, we would like to predict what how they would respond to 12 targeted drugs. And how we aim at solving this, we think that we can improve the predictions when we bring in domain knowledge of experts. And specifically here, we assume that the experts might know something about the relevance of the features to this prediction task. So how we aim at doing that is that we would eventually like to have this kind of interactive system that could be used in clinic, so the doctors could really input their also tacit knowledge to the system. And for that, we have developed these interactive expert knowledge elicitation methods. So we have the fat data. We have learned a model of that data, but then we would like to improve the performance of that model by asking the expert. And that we can do by, we have a learning algorithm that selects what we will ask next from the expert answers, and then we input their answer as a feedback to our prediction model, update the model, and then iterate that loop so that we get better predictions. And here, you might wonder, what are the specific questions that we are going to ask the experts? So when we want to predict the drug response, and we assume that the experts might know if some features are relevant to that predictions, we pick a feature, a mutation or a cytogenetic feature, and ask the expert, show the feature, say, does this mutation affect the drug, how a cell will respond to a drug? And then the expert might say, based on their knowledge, yes, I think this is relevant to this prediction, or no, this is not relevant at all. Sometimes they might also know that some mutations will make these cells more responsive, more sensitive to the drug, and sometimes if the mutation exists, they will be less sensitive. So that's why we also have this kind of directional feedback where we know from the expert's answer the correlation that the feature will have with the output. A little bit background for this work. So drug sensitivity prediction, their sparse models are mostly used. They are the most successful ones, and quite regularly the standard, like lasso, elastic net especially. And then if you want to go to more complex models to have non-linearities and so on, for example, kernel methods are a way to do that. On the other hand, we draw inspiration from Bayesian modeling and prior elicitation, which has been well studied already for long. But there, the idea has been that the expert knowledge will be collected beforehand, and the expert will define the prior distributions that will be used for the parameters. But in our case, we have over 3,000 parameters. 3,000 features, so it's not feasible that the expert would go through all of them and define the prior distributions for those. So that brings a need for interactive prior knowledge elicitation methods. And quite recently, there has been some work from others and from our group, which has shown that when the expert is queried interactively, it can help in clustering, and it can help in prediction in textual cases. But in this work, we lie here in the center. So we would like to apply these and extend this method, because they are not compatible with this yet. So extend these methods to predict from high-dimensional omics data the drug sensitivities, and simultaneously remove as much of the expert of the work from the expert as possible. So we would only ask the really useful questions. And here is our approach in a nutshell. So we have a probabilistic linear regression, and it's sparse because those are the simplest but quite well-performing models in these drug sensitivity predictions. And then we have a sequential knowledge elicitation methods that will decide which of the questions we will ask the experts next. So it will choose the feature and the drug that we will query from the expert. And in this work, we developed two methods for this, and they are based on two complementary approaches. One of them is about experimental design, and the other one about user modeling. A bit more about those later, but let's first focus on the prediction model part. So as said, we have a probabilistic model of drug responses Y, and we assume that they are linearly related to the genomic features of the patient. And then we make the model sparse by putting a spike and slab prior to the regression weights W. And this spike and slab prior basically just says that if the feature is relevant, the prior will be normal. And if it's not relevant, the prior will be Dirac delta distribution, which will make the regression weights to 0, so remove those features from the model. And then how do we make the feedback to come into this model is through is that we assume that they are observation about the latent variables in the model. So this relevance feedback is observation about, well, the relevance of that feature, and we also allow their small probability that the expert might be also wrong. So even though the feature is relevant, the expert might say otherwise. And the same for this directional feedback, so it's observation about the sign of the regression weights. And then to the sequential expert knowledge elicitation methods, how do we select what to ask next? Our first approach is called sequential experimental design, and it's based on the idea that we try to maximize the information gain in the next query. So we look at the posterior predictive distributions before and after seeing the feedback and find the one that has highest expectation, that they are as different as possible after, if we get answer to this feedback. And we use KL divergence to measure this difference between the distributions, and they then take expectation of the possible answers. And in this way, we select the next feature and drug to query from an expert. The second approach, which is complementary to the previous one, is user model, and it's based on user modeling. So we try to build a model about what the user knows, and we try to do. We can do that because we get observations from the user each time they answer the one question. We can learn what they know, but there's a problem that when we want to decide the questions, should we ask those which will allow us to learn as much as possible, or should we choose those that would actually benefit most the end goal, which is the improved predictions? So this exploitation dilemma has been quite well studied in multi-arm bandit literature. And here we apply this multi-arm bandit linear model to model the expert, so that when the expert answers the questions, we will be able to learn using reinforcement learning. Basically, it's a reinforcement learning method. So we will be able to learn and direct the elicitation towards the queries where the knowledge is available. And in order to do this, we use biological prior information in form of KEGG pathways from MSIG database and drug targets from drug bank to describe relations between these different queries that we have. And in so doing, we find the next query of feature M and drug D. Then to the experiments that we made. So we had two objectives here. First of all, we wanted to evaluate if having this knowledge from the expert, having this kind of relevance feedback and the directional feedback, if it would help in prediction, what effect it will have to the prediction model. And therefore, in order to do that, we collected offline feedback and then just plug it in the model and see how it performs. But that is not our only goal, because we also want to minimize the burden of the expert while they are giving this feedback. So for that one, we wanted to evaluate the efficiency of these sequential expert knowledge elicitation methods that collect the feedback. And we used simulation to do that. So we simulated how the interaction would have gone, but we answered the questions with the answers that the real experts had given. So it's kind of simulating what if they had sat on next to the or in front of the screen and used the system to give the feedback. And as a baseline, we have this kind of dummy selection method, so just randomly selecting the next feature drug query. And here's a quick, I will show you quickly just what kind of information we collected. So in this initial study, we collected feedback from two experts. One of them is senior researcher and the other one is doctoral candidate. And we asked them to evaluate basically the relevance of over 2,000 drug feature pairs. Here we didn't include all the possible mutations because we had over 3,000 of them. So that would result in 3,000 times 12 drugs that we have over 10,000 of questions that the experts would have had to answer. That wouldn't have been feasible. But even here, it was quite, well, it took quite some time from them. But we wanted to reduce their cognitive load, and so we also wanted to find out how much would it just help the model if they just gave their kind of knowledge that they already have. So we asked them not to refer to any external data sources, just to answer based on their gut feeling. So not all those relations that they said that are possibly relevant are not established associations. They were if they've had a feeling that it could affect, then they said yes, that's relevant. And here we see that, for example, the senior researcher gave much more directional feedback than the doctoral candidate, and quite expectedly, most of the answers are still that we don't know if there is a relation between that mutation and drug response. Okay, to our results, we compared our model to 3 baselines, basically dummy model of just using the mean of the data for predicting, and then to ridge regression and elastic net regression. And none of these methods take into account the expert feedback. So we also included our spike and slab model without expert feedback. And from this, you can see that the performance of spike and slab and ridge regression are quite similar, no difference there. Actually, elastic net works quite not very well in this data, but that's probably because we only had 51 samples and over 3,000 mutations that were included. And a good thing is that when you add the expert feedback there, you get improvement. Both the senior researcher, where the improvement was also, I mean, the model with the feedback was significantly better than model without, but also the doctoral candidate feedback improved the model. As a performance measures, we used C-index, which kind of measures how well the order of the patients is preserved in the prediction. and then the mean squared error of the prediction. And in these both cases, the expert feedback improves the predictions. And here, then, to address how well we can elicit this information from the experts, here are the curves from doctoral candidate and senior researcher. The y-axis is the error of the prediction, so lower the better. And on the x-axis, we have how many feedbacks the expert has given, so how many answers we have gotten. And here we have the red ones are our baseline. So randomly selecting, we did 50 different random selections. I mean, just random orders in which the feedback can be given. And the blue one is our user model, and green one, the sequential experimental design. I think I will zoom in to the senior researcher feedback to see some details, but the main trend here is that the more you get feedback, the better the model predictions go. But here we can look a bit more clearly. So all the models start from the same point without any feedback, and if you randomly select the queries, you will get about linear improvement, because, you know, even a blind chicken finds a kernel of corn now and then, so that is able to find some of it. But you can go much faster to better prediction if you use this more intelligent way of choosing the queries. And both sequential experimental design and bandit user model are significantly better than this randomization here. We measured the significance using the area under the curve, because that kind of integrates over how fast our prediction error decreases. In the doctoral candidate feedback, though, you might notice that it's the other way around. So the sequential experimental design is significantly better, but the bandit user model doesn't perform very well. And that's something that we would like to investigate in the future, why that is, and how we can maybe combine the two approaches, because they are complementary. So, as a conclusion, we had a probabilistic sparse linear regression model that took into account the expert feedback as noisy observations about the latent variables in the model. And then we had sequential knowledge elicitation to decide which questions are the most useful to ask from the expert next. And for that, we developed two methods. So the sequential experimental design, which maximizes the information gain in the next query, and user modeling, which uses this bandit modeling reinforcement learning for learning what is the best possible interaction we can have with this particular expert. And as take-home messages, I think I would like you to remember that these are the first indications, quite promising ones, that the expert knowledge elicitation will improve prediction, help predicting in these high-dimensional cases, especially in omics data. So we don't know, to our knowledge, this hasn't been applied to personalized medicine case yet. So this is really the first study about this. And in these cases, however, the interaction is quite essential, because there's no way the expert will evaluate everything. And because of that, we need methods for eliciting this knowledge from experts as quickly as possible. And I would like to thank my co-authors, and especially our PIs, Pekka Marttinen and Samuel Kaski. And I would also like to thank you for staying with me here today. And yeah, thanks.
Okay, very nice talk, very nice work. From your experience implementing your method, what would you think are factors contributing to your MSE curves not decreasing monotonically with the number of queries?
Well, for some of the cases, well, that basically means that the expert feedback didn't improve the model, if the curve is not decreasing monotonically. There are multiple reasons for that. First of all, it might be that the expert just guessed wrongly I mean, that might be. But it also might be that just it's an artifact in this data, that there by accident there were, I mean, that in larger population you would actually see the effect. And then also one thing that I started to think about is that maybe it could also be that if the expert answers yes, this feature is relevant, and that's very collinear with something that was already there, it might cause some confusion.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for the great talk. So you have shown us that with the usage of expert feedback, the model will be improved, isn't it? So
Yes.
did you try to combine experts, both experts, and look at it?
Well, we didn't do that yet. Of course, that's the very natural next step, because if this would be used in a clinic, real doctors, we would of course like to accumulate the knowledge as much as possible. But that requires quite a lot of research in how do you combine the expertise from multiple experts who might not agree. So we didn't even actually test yet how would be the case with these experts. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks. Great talk. When collecting this expert knowledge from the student, from the doctoral candidate and the scientist, you had this problem that you have lots of votings. I don't know. So, did you consider maybe doing something like giving the experts opportunity to give a confidence? Something like, okay, I think it's this, but with a low confidence or with a high confidence. And do you think this could possibly reduce the number of I don't knows? And on the other hand, somehow still about the rating that they give, improve the results? Or is it too much burden for the expert to actually say that? Because sometimes when I was filling out some kind of questionnaires, often I have difficulty to say how much I know this or not.
Yeah, thanks. Great comments. And you are really right that it would be probably better if we could also ask the experts about the confidence. In this case, we used an Excel form where they had to fill up all these answers, and it was quite laborious already to them. So we didn't want to burden them more in this case. But of course, when we have the system that would ask sequentially, once we have kind of established that that's a good way, then we can add there the confidence also. And I think you answered your own question by saying that it's kind of also maybe difficult for them to address that one. Also, since it's a probabilistic model that we use, we can have a noise model for the expert, and we kind of can adapt the model to estimate the level of noise in the expert.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's thank the speaker once more.